Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. Around here we spend a lot of time talking about budget decks and building a budget collection. And today is no exception to that whatsoever. In fact, I want to take this opportunity to introduce you to what I believe is going to be our main grinding deck. Now, if you're not familiar with the concept of grinding, basically on Arena you spend a lot of time converting your effort into resources as a budget free-to-play player, because the only other way to gather resources is to spend real-world currency to do so. So we need a tool to help us convert our time to resources efficiently. Historically, that tool has been a red deck wins in various different builds. In fact, many years you have 2 or 3 different options on that. And this year, red deck is our go-to. Last year, we built around Bombardment and had a lot of success with that deck. I ended up with a 53% win ratio on that deck for the entire year, which is pretty fantastic for a deck that I put almost no wild cards in. Well, I put no wild cards into at all, with the exception of 2 commons and 2 uncommons, and really just did a tremendous amount of work for us. So stay tuned and let's talk about this year's grinder deck. But before we get into all that, let me take this opportunity to invite you to subscribe to the channel. See, back in January of this year, I set a goal of having 100 subscribers before the end of the year. And boy, have we come a long way since that time. And while I may be doing a lot of the work, I can't do it without you. You see, this isn't one of those huge YouTube channels that gains or loses 1,000 subs in a day and hardly notices. Around here, you matter. Just like all these folks here matter. See, thus far we've got up to 81 subs out of our goal of 100. And while I know they're not all listed here, these are the folks that have answered the call and made their subscription to the channel public information. And I want to take this opportunity to not only invite you to join the community if you have not done so already, but thank all of these fine folks, because around here, my audience matters. It's what shapes the channel. It's what I drive for. And one last thing, I'd like to do something cool when we do hit that goal of 100 subscribers. Problem is, I don't really know what to do and have very few ideas. So if you have a moment and you have a thought, comment it down below on what you think we should do to celebrate our goal of 100 subscribers being reached. Now, what were we talking about? Oh, right. Goblins. Yep, that's right. Goblins. This is going to be the premier red deck. So far, I am not seeing a mono red, big red deck out there. I think the space that big red usually holds in the format is probably going to be overtaken by some value share of black red treasures and blue red prismari. Mostly built on the strength of Goldspan Dragon in both cases. And honestly, this is probably the only deck of the year where we're going to talk about red and not talk about Goldspan Dragon. That mythic is that good. But let's set that aside for now. Let's talk about goblins. As you recall, I told you this deck is not good on day 1, but it's not bad either. And this deck is going to improve rapidly because you don't need a lot of rares for this. which makes it an ideal budget candidate. And all of the cards that you need draft from a single set. That, of course, being the D&D inspired Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, which is our quick draft starting here very shortly. At least that's the plan as I'm recording this. So let's go through the deck. As you can see, all of the cards here are cards that you get in your new player experience, as you may be able to pick up. I am actually recording this in the wee hours of the morning before the new player experience decks drop, but unless they change something in the deck configurations and haven't talked about it, all of these cards are expected to be in your new player experience. So let's go through them and see what we got. First up, Raging Goblin. The 1/1 with haste for 1 is kind of bread and butter for red. He is a goblin. He fits the deck. It's a pretty easy fix. There are years in the past where I have recommended using 2 common wildcards to pick up additional copies of Raging Goblin. This is not one of those years. There's simply better cards that we can put in there that aren't going to require our wildcards that we can draft. Next up is Shock. You get 3 copies. The fact that this can be used for removal as well as throwing it directly to the face makes this card really, really good. Storm Strike is honestly kind of a placeholder in this. The fact that it gives +1 and first strike will basically turn something like a Raging Goblin into pseudo removal. And of course the Scry 1 helps us dig to our better cards in the deck as we go on. Tin Street Cadet is one of those cards that I'm a little on the fence about at the moment, but it is one of the better options on day 1. The fact that it replaces itself when it gets blocked and presumably killed, it just makes it a value engine for us. And if you were to combine Tin Street Cadet, once blockers have been assigned, and use something like Storm Strike to again turn the Cadet into pseudo removal, or shocking out the thing that's blocking it. Sure, its damage is not getting through to the face the way you want, but it has put another goblin on the board. So little tricks like that will help you incrementally gain advantage with a deck like this, even on day 1. Battlecry Goblin, we get, I'm not sure we get 4 copies on that. All right, sorry about the short interruption there. The Battlecry Goblin, in fact, is not part of the new player experience. I did not cut that correctly. So I have made some minor adjustments to the deck. All the things we've already talked about have remained true. Next up is Goblin Tunneler. He's a goblin. That's the only reason it's in the deck right now. This card is pretty much absolute trash, and will be a joy to cut from this deck as we're able to improve our collection. On the opposite end of the spectrum, a common in our new player experience at 3 copies is Hobgoblin Captain with Pack Tactics, a 3/1. Really a fantastic card and something we're going to want to add additional copies of as soon as we can. Nest Robber is the placeholder that I had to put in for the fact that Battlecry Goblin is not part of your new player experience. It does have haste, it does hit for 2. There's many times where I do actually use this card and I'm happy about it. It's not long for this deck. Roil Eruption is one of our removal pieces that can also go to face for a very large amount of mana. 3 damage though is not bad for 2, especially when you can put that to the face as opposed to a creature. I'm not sure that 3 copies is right. I'm kind of going to have to work with y'all and play with the balance between Roil Eruption and Shock. I think 6 total is correct, but we might go 4 Shock, 2 Roil Eruptions. We're just going to have to see what the meta does on that. Now, ideally, this deck wants to top out at 3 mana, as fast red decks often do. So leading that is Burn Bright. This is one of those fantastic commons that turns aggro into an Alpha Strike machine. Meaning you swing with all your creatures, they block effectively, and then you make them regret their life choices by burning bright, and all of your unblocked creatures that they thought they could survive and then kill you on the swing back, in fact kill them. Goblin Gathering is one of those cards, depending upon when this is released, we may have already discussed this card at some length. It makes goblins, and it gets better the more times you cast it. If you're going to run this card, run all 4 copies. If you're not going to run it, don't run any. There's no reason to run 2 or 3 copies on this, and God forbid you run 1. Let's see here, Raid Bombardment. This was my pet deck card from last year. You can still check out the playlist on that if you're interested in maybe building a bombardment style deck. But honestly, I think Goblins, particularly at full strength, is going to be much better than anything we could do built around Bombardment. But it is not a terrible card for this deck on day 1. So it is a placeholder. It will get cut eventually. Hulking Bugbear, 3/3 haste for 3. Pretty darn good. The double red on this is supposed to make it a little harder to cast, but we're mono red, so we don't care. Very solid card, something we're going to want a 4th copy of just as soon as we can get it. Draft that out. Basalt Ravager is a card that synergizes to some degree, but as it is not a goblin, this will be a card that we cut eventually, and frankly, everything in this 4-drop spot will get cut eventually for better cards. Basalt Ravager deals X damage to any target, where X is the greatest number of creatures you control that have a creature type in common. Let me tell you, we're not going to do giants here. We're going to do goblins. Just a nice late game removal and something that can swing next turn and maybe finish out that game for you. A little more synergy with Goblin Gang Leader, puts 4 power on the board without any lordships going on for 4 mana. It's pretty much on rate. It's a little high-end curve for us, but it's not bad. Goblin Trashmaster is the only lord that we get as part of our new player experience, so we've got to run it. Giving all of your other goblins +1/+1, and if you notice, almost all of your creatures are goblins, so it basically pumps your whole board. Destroying target artifact is not something that's going to come up a whole lot, and honestly, I think your goblins are more valuable as part of your aggro team. One of our non-goblin cards is the Battledriver. It gives a creature +2 and haste when it comes onto the battlefield. So it turns something like Goblin Gathering late game, where it's creating 3, maybe 4 or 5 tokens, a real threat, turning all of those into 3/1 hasty goblins, 4/2s if you happen to have the Trashmaster in play as well. But really, all of this stuff is pretty late game. We're looking to win on turn 4, not continue building our board position. Turn 6 in a deck like this should be unheard of. So we've talked a lot about what stays and what will go. Let's take a few minutes and talk about the cards that we want to be adding to this deck so that we can cut those less valuable cards. One of the cards that is great if you have copies of, but I don't think is necessary for the deck itself, is the Den of the Bugbear. The ability to, in say a post-wipe situation or something like that, have an additional goblin threat, and the fact that it builds more goblins onto the board is pretty good for a land. I'm not sure what the right number is on this. I think it's probably not going to be 4 because it coming into play tapped on turn 3 or turn 4 is pretty problematic for us. But as an early play, it's pretty fantastic. Goblin Javelineer is a common. Again, all of these cards coming from the D&D theme set. Goblin Javelineer is just going to be an absolute MVP for this deck. 1/1 for 1 with haste is pretty much lineup stats we've got with the Raging Goblin that we talked about before. But the fact that it deals 1 damage to target creature blocking it is really good. So it effectively kills off X1s and lives to tell the tale. It can kill off X2s and not give up any aggressiveness. And of course, if you have Lords in play, that only gets better. Battlecry Goblin, this is a card I wanted to talk about earlier, but new player experience just didn't allow me to. This is probably the MVP card of this deck, and is absolutely going to be in the build. We're going to want all 4 copies of this pretty darn soon. Not only is it a 2/2 for 2, so it's on rate, it has Pack Tactics that allows it to generate even more tapped and attacking goblins. And it's a mana sink. So for 1 and a red, goblins you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. So make sure to activate that prior to your combat step. That way, any new goblins you have on the board can attack from your first main phase. Just really, really great card for this deck. This card has the potential to be just as good as Embercleave was last year, because don't forget, you can activate that multiple times, and you can do it mid-combat. So if you've activated it once, giving all of your goblins haste, now you can swing in with it, make them make their blocking decisions, and then activate it a second, third, however many times you want to, in order to make for them having made bad blocking decisions, or maybe they didn't realize how much damage they were potentially letting through. Really a punishing card for them. Next up is you see a pair of goblins. Creatures you control get +2/+0 until end of turn, or create 2 1/1 red goblins. We talked about this card very briefly. This is the deck it's going to shine. And my thought process on this is 3 copies is probably right for this deck, but those 3 copies allow us to cut 2 copies of Burn Bright and all 4 copies of Goblin Gathering. So really freeing up 3 spaces for some of these other cards here pretty quickly. And of course, we don't know what the future holds as far as goblins that may come out in the fall set. Last card up, and the one that is really going to take this deck from mediocre to grand slam, maybe even the best budget deck for the year, is Hobgoblin Bandit Lord. And I would say to prioritize this in draft, but under my draft strategy, if you see a rare, take it. It's not like if you pass a rare, you're going to get another one next turn or next pick. So always take your rares and mythics. But if you do happen to get the Hobgoblin Lords early, that's going to be fantastic. Other goblins you control get +1/+1. And this guy is damage on a stick. For 1 red and a tap, he can deal damage equal to the number of goblins you control to any target, including an opponent's face. So this just makes really quick work of any deck that's not set up to take aggro. So that's why there's 65 cards in this deck, is because I know on day 1 you probably don't have these 5 cards right here. And that is totally understandable. But I wanted to talk about those 5 cards and include them in the deck list so that you have a game plan of where this deck is going and not just what we want to cut. So this is your day 1 grinder deck. Get out there, draft your Adventures in the Forgotten Realms aggressively, and this deck will be premium before the second set of Innistrad drops. I believe it's Crimson Vow. So there's no reason not to build this deck. There's no wild cards involved here. This deck is only going to get better as time goes on. The only thing that really runs something like this, or ruins something like this rather, is premium removal like Wrath of God effects. And frankly, the deck rebuilds so quickly and does so much damage before they can even Wrath that even that generally is not a great option for them. Wait, what's that? You didn't catch all that? Well, Matt wants you to know the links are in the doobly-doo. And with all that having been said, please take this opportunity to like, comment, and subscribe. It is the budget way to support this budget channel because it doesn't cost you a thing. Do it for Graham. Do it for the algorithm. Do it for the iced coffee. And until next time, I'll see you in the arena.